This is Rover Red. Welcome to the Otherwhere. If you would like to help Rover Red survive her perilous journey, please go to roverredpodcast.com/vote. You could submit your suggestions, vote on what Rover Red does next, or join the Rover Council. The Rover Council is free to join, and they receive access to 3 unpublished prequel episodes of Rover Red, as well as special polls hidden on secret, password-protected pages. They act as Rover Red's collective unconscious. Rover Red is completely reader-guided, so make your decisions carefully.
Evie, Bird's coming back. Does the Rover Council have an answer for me yet?
Unfortunately, Leah, the Rover Council has made their decision.
Okay. Tell me.
The Rover Council has decided that you should let the old man walk the tightrope in order to find out what exactly happened to Ambrist, thus possibly giving you helpful information. You should feign interest/fascination in the flowers and with what happens to the man, and then ask questions that Bird will, hopefully, be more than happy and excited to answer.
I ask them to help me save him, and their response is to let him walk the tightrope?
Yes, it appears as though there was a strong consensus that you should allow the man to walk the tightrope and not attempt to save him.
Is that what we're going to do now? Toss people away?
I am unsure.
Okay. I'll do it.
Bird returned to stand next to Leah as he addressed his guests. The moment of truth has arrived, everyone. Rover, what have you decided in regards to this man's appeal for mercy? Will you extend the hand of mercy as I did for you? Or will you allow callousness to win the day and choose to turn your back on his plea? Bird waited for a few moments before turning to look down at Leah. As he smiled at her, she could see the awful glee in his eyes. Bird interrupted her. Stand up, Rover. Show that man some respect before you reveal your decision. You're about to rule on life or death. And let's be honest here, it would take a miracle for him to make it across the tightrope alive. Leah glanced at the old man in the clear enclosure. He pressed a hand against the glass and stared up at her with pleading eyes. It was almost as though he knew that she was the one making the decision as to his fate. His eyes bore into her beseechingly. Leah turned her back to him as his lower lips started quivering. She took a deep breath, shook her head, and closed her eyes before speaking.
Let him walk.
There was silence. Leah opened her eyes to see the guest who'd been sitting by the door stand and leave, his eyes shining with tears that threatened to overflow. The response from the rest of Bird's guests were scattered. Some smiled at their good fortune while others glared at Leah. Bird gave Leah a withering frown. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You are a rover after all, and rovers do seem to be best at looking out for themselves. I'm not sure his son will ever forgive you, though.
His son?
Bird shrugged as though it were obvious. The man in the back with all that emotion? You just sentenced his father to death.
Oh no.
Oh, yes. Bird twirled around to address the man in the enclosure. He did so by drawing his hand horizontally across his own throat. The old man took in a deep breath, his chest hitching with his own tears. He took a second deep breath, appearing to calm himself, and stepped forward onto the rope. 6 more of the creatures with the spindly black and white legs appeared on the walls of the enclosure. Their long, multi-jointed legs reminded Leah of the sun-dried legs of the corpses, the mottled skin pulled tight against the bone from her very own compound after it had been destroyed. She took a deep breath and forced herself to watch. She was the one who'd sentenced this man to die, so it was the least she could do.
Can those black and white creatures get out of the enclosure?
Bird sneered at her before answering. Why ever would you assume that I'm an amateur botanist? When Leah didn't answer, he asked another biting question. Do you think they magically appeared in that enclosure?
I'm sorry. I didn't think it through.
Leah, the Rover Council requested that you appear interested in what happens to the man. The old man took several steps out onto the rope. As he did so, 3 more of the black and white creatures appeared behind him on the walls. 2 of the ones ahead of him crawled onto the ceiling of the enclosure. The man gave no indication that he saw any of them, continuing forward steadily.
What can you tell me about the creatures?
Bird rolled his eyes. Much and more. What are you expecting here, a lesson in botany? A lesson on collecting? I'm not a teacher, and I think that's enough with the questions. Let's just enjoy the show.
All right.
Leah, you have just received a message from the Rover Council.
Read it.
Leah, you can't afford to cross Bird. Please be careful, as he seems mercurial. Mercy may be what you want, but is sparing one man worth endangering yourself and your mission? Shar.
Thanks, Shar. I'll keep that in mind.
Bird slammed his hand on the table, rattling the glasses. What you should keep in mind is what's taking place in front of your very eyes. We could always add 2 people to the tightrope, you know. Leah quit talking and watched. The man took several more steps before seeming to lose his nerve and deciding to barrel through the rest. Running his hands along the walls of the enclosure, he moved forward quickly, lifting his hand from the wall whenever he got to a place where a creature sat waiting. Leah's heart rate accelerated as he approached the end of the rope, her legs bouncing with nervous energy as she watched his progress. He was 2 feet from the end when things went south. He lifted his hand from the wall as there was a creature directly in its path on the glass. This time, though, instead of staying still as the creatures previously had, this one lifted up 2 legs and stopped him. It was a delicate, slow movement that Leah almost didn't catch until she saw the black and white multi-jointed legs wrap around his hand. What happened next happened fast, and Leah forced her eyes open. The creature that had stopped the man scuttled up his arm and rested on his chest. The man seemed surprised and tried to take another step, but couldn't, as one of the creatures on the ceiling dropped down onto the tightrope and grabbed his foot in mid-air. Unbalanced, he reached both hands out to steady himself on the walls of the enclosure. The creature on the rope pulled his foot down and wrapped around his other foot as well, anchoring him to the rope. Where his hands pressed against the clear enclosure's walls, multiple creatures rushed forward, and Leah could see that on the hand facing her, the creatures hooked their sharp, black talons into his flesh to keep him exactly where they wanted him. Realizing that his fate was now sealed, the man slowly turned his head to face Leah and the rest of those in the upper balcony, his eyes fixed on Leah's. And although much of his face was taken over with fear and pain, Leah could also see another emotion filter across his face. It was a look of resignation at his impending death. And that was somehow worse. She could see that he'd accepted it. She could see that he'd accepted what she'd done to him. The old man opened his mouth, whether to say something, to scream, or to take a deep breath. Leah would never know, because in the next instant the creature on his chest pounced on his face. The effect was immediate, and the man's body looked as though it was electrified, shaking with raw energy as he tried to remove the thing from his face, while his hands and feet were anchored and unable to aid him. The rest of the creatures on the wall moved in. Leah had seen flies swarm over the faces of the dead before, and although that was horrifying, this was much worse, as these flies were equipped with sharp talons that tore flesh, and this corpse was still alive. When the old man quit struggling, the creatures released him, allowing him to fall down into the teeming bed of dusky flowers below. As the man fell, Leah was treated to the image of his torn and ragged body. It was an image she would likely never forget. Bird glanced over at her and sighed. The trick is to fall into the flowers below immediately. If you do that, you'll be hit with a numbing poison that will knock you out. Also, once those flowers claim you, the striped ones will leave you alone. Of course, when you awaken, you'll find yourself with all sorts of other, problems.
Is that what happened to Ambrist?
Bird nodded, affecting a look of true sadness. She took one look at the striped creatures and chose to fall from the rope rather than attempt to deal with any further complications.
Why did she walk the tightrope to begin with?
Bird shrugged. She needed Strike. Why else?
Is that why the old man walked the tightrope as well?
Leah glanced over to the enclosure and saw that all the striped creatures had retreated down into the bed of swaying flowers, hiding beneath their dusky petals. Not quite, Bird said with a smirk.
What do you mean, not quite?
He was a prisoner. Walking across the tightrope would have earned him his freedom. Well, I suppose had you ruled in favor of mercy, he would have gone free as well. Leah breathed a deep sigh of relief.
He was a prisoner? Oh, thanks, Speaker.
Bird nodded. He most assuredly was a prisoner. I brought him along with those others. Bird gestured to the catwalk above the enclosure where several people sat. Upon closer inspection, she could see that their hands and feet were bound.
You buy prisoners?
Of course, Bird said. Don't worry though, I make my strike back exponentially.
I feel a lot better.
Bird laughed. That I make my strike back exponentially, or that you sentenced a guilty man to his death?
That he was a prisoner. Was his son a prisoner as well?
No, Bird said. Apparently, the son does not take after his father.
What did his father do?
Bird took in a deep breath and sighed, shaking his head. He was a doctor of sorts. The type we in Famine do not appreciate practicing here.
What sort of doctor is that?
Bird shrugged. The sort who implants bone for silt eaters. Leah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she'd done. Her own bone mass, already below the normal range, was being siphoned off by the silt living in her bloodstream. She was still unsure as to what had caused it to begin with, as well as why it was still dropping. But the fact that she'd sentenced a man to death who could have helped her made her stomach turn over. A chill slipped down Leah's spine.
Are there a lot of those types of doctors in Famine?
Of course not, Bird cackled. The Lord of Death has promised excruciating agony to any Death Threader practicing outside of the Death Province, as well as any Death Threader who implants any non-death citizen.
And a Death Threader is... what? A witch who implants additional bone?
You guessed it, Bird nodded. There are rumors of another man in the Conquest Province who does bone implants. All anyone really knows about him, though, is he has crazy white hair that sticks up everywhere. As a side note, how embarrassing. Anyways, I believe his name is Morty? No, sorry, Rick, but I believe he now goes by Dr. Sanchez. Leah closed her eyes. Leah, I believe the man Bird is referring to was the same one who implanted you with the Conclave chip and subsequently died back in the Colosseum.
Are there any others in Famine?
No, Bird chuckled. Anyone using Flow in Famine better have a metric ton of bone implants. Otherwise... Bird whistled and drew his hand horizontally across his throat again.
How can a Death Threader tell the difference between a Death Citizen and a non-Death Citizen?
Besides the required demonstration of their flow, I'm not really sure, but all Death Threaders are from the higher orders and are keen to keep power within their own order. That's why you'll never see a Drudge Death Threader implanting a Shrike Witch. Leah felt ice in her veins as she stared at the body of the man she'd sentenced to death, thus dooming herself. Hello, loyal listener. Today, in honor of all that the Rover Council has done for Leah, I will be reading a haiku. The title of this haiku is Survival in Apocalypse, and I wrote it just for you. If you loved Leah, why sentence her to death here? You love Evie more. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. If you would like to learn more about what I enjoy, visit roverredpodcast.com/support. There, you'll find premium full-length episodes that take place in the province of Death and may soon involve Jonah and Jolene. You'll also find exclusive t-shirts, mugs, and totes that you can't find in our shops, as well as maps and scripts. Become a patron and protect the... Oh. Well. Goodbye.
Bird, do you know anything about the prophecy?
The prophecy? You mean the prophecy about the speaker? Bird asked, his mouth curled in amusement.
Yeah, the speaker prophecy.
Bird rolled his eyes. I always thought it was just a Rover myth. Something parents told children before tucking them in at night to make them feel better about themselves.
It probably is, but I always like to ask everyone I meet if they know anything about it.
And what have you found thus far?
Pretty much what you said. A lot of rumors and myths, but I like collecting them. Kind of like you like collecting flowers.
I appreciate you not repeating your earlier mistake. Bird nodded, his lips bunched in a rueful smirk. And I do understand the drive to collect. I can tell you one thing I've heard. I doubt you'll be able to do much with it, but from one collector to another, I think you might find it interesting and maybe a tiny bit mysterious.
Go on.
There's a rumor that started floating around not too long ago about a prophecy shard being found below a Rover compound southeast of here. Leah frowned. Bird leaned forward across the table and his voice dropped barely above a whisper. Everyone at the Rover compound where it's said that they found that prophecy shard vanished shortly after.
Vanished? Even the traders?
Even the traders. That's how those in the region realized. When the traders stopped coming around, the locals went to investigate the compound. They found the doors and gates to the compound open and unlocked. Several famine locals entered, but none who entered the compound came back out, and no rovers exited either. Several others entered in search of the first group of locals, but that party didn't return. Leah, this does not make any sense. Why would a door to a Rover compound ever be open and unlocked?
I don't know, Evie. From one collector to another. Thank you, Bird.
You're welcome. Bird leaned back in his chair. If you ever head down in that direction and live to tell the tale, I'd love to hear what happened or what's inside that compound.
Can I ask you another question, Bird?
If it's about that Rover compound, I don't have any more information.
It's about Ambrose.
Leah watched Bird's reaction carefully, but it appeared as though Bird didn't care anything about Ambrose. Sure, whatever you want, Bird answered.
Why did Ambrose need Strike?
Bird picked up his glass from the table and took a sip before answering. The same reason anyone needs Strike.
No, I mean, I was told she was taken to Monroe's tower.
Taken? Bird asked with a frown. The famine nobles don't take anything. The people of famine freely give of themselves. There's no reason to take. Leah frowned at this and chewed on her lip.
I don't understand.
Look, those who have lived in famine all their lives and never made any inroads into the nobility tend to have a deep-seated resentment towards these nobles. They also tend to not appreciate their children seeking entrance into the upper echelons of famine culture.
If Ambrose was planning on attempting to join the nobility, why would she be here, trying to earn Strike first?
Bird shook his hand before him as though it contained Strike. It takes Strike to gain entrance. You have to grease several palms in order to even get an appearance at a single court date, and you have to grease even more palms if you plan on staying for any length of time. Then comes apprenticeship, but that's a whole other thing. It's pay to play, and oh, how they make you pay.
So she was trying to earn Strike to make it into the nobility.
Bird nodded, and a sad look crossed his face for an instant, then was gone. She was. But like so many, she fell before she ever made it to her first court date. Leah looked down at the still form of Ambrose, the dusky flowers rooted to her shoulders, and the side of her face swayed softly.
Silt.
The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Leah asked Bird if there was some place she could lay down and rest. He showed her to a bare hallway where she promptly curled up and fell asleep. He'd asked if she wanted a tour of his greenhouse, but she declined. She'd had her fill of flowers and of famine. Bird didn't seem upset, nodding and saying, "Probably better. I'm growing wary of your company." When Leah woke, bleary-eyed and confused for a moment as to where she was, she immediately wished she was still asleep. She stretched, and without bothering to look around for Bird, she slipped out the front door, making sure to stay as far away from the glass case filled with flowers in the front lobby as she could. Outside of Bird's greenhouse and games parlor, Leah stared into the gathering gloom of another fresh night in the Otherwhere.
Conclave. Bring my turbine, and as soon as I am outside of Rich city limits, reactivate all Conquest technology within Rich.
Confirmed.
Leah, where are you going?
To that Rover compound southeast of here. I may be doomed, but that doesn't mean that Jonah has to be. This was Rover Red. We'll see you here again in 2 weeks. Your suggestions and votes will determine Leah's future in the Otherwhere. That website, one last time, is roverredpodcast.com/vote. Vote wisely. Rover Red was produced by Bloodworth Creative, starring Madison Martin as Leah and written by Christopher Bloodworth. If you enjoyed Rover Red, please rate and especially review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you found us. Reviews are important because they keep us on the charts where people can find our show. Rover Red is supported by you, our listeners. For more information, visit our website and click on Support Rover Red in the upper right-hand corner. We couldn't make Rover Red without you. Thank you so much for listening.